Thank you, Chairman Shimkus and Ranking Member Tonko, for holding this important hearing today to discuss and highlight the growing presence of harmful perfluorinated chemicals being discovered across the country. You know, there's an old saying that says, nothing lasts forever. Unfortunately, nothing, that is, except perfluorinated chemicals, which were designed to stand the test of time. These chemicals, their dangers already having been laid out by my colleagues, can be found all around us. And in recent years, we've seen more and more cases of confirmed contamination sites in the environment and drinking water sources, especially across Michigan. And like my colleague, Mr. Upton, we too found very dangerous levels in fish in the Huron River and have had the same crisis during the month of August. As we continue to test for PFAS, I fear that this is only the beginning. The trend's going to continue. PFAS are man-made and will require a man-woman-made solution from all of us working together. Every federal agency, every state and local official, and Congress needs to immediately take this issue seriously. I look forward to working with everyone on this committee and my colleague, Mr. Upton, and I, who will be shortly introducing legislation. Thank you, and I yield back. I think you can tell that Republicans and Democrats are pretty unified here on the concern about the PFAS chemicals. And I want to build, the Flint water crisis is something that every member on this dais has in their head, and every American across the country is worried about. And PFAS in Michigan is scaring people more than the Flint water did, but I also think that it's across the country, as you've heard from my colleagues here. I've got several points I want to make, but I'll build right on the last questions first. And I'm very glad that you went to Fayetteville. North Carolina wanted to see you, but so did Michigan. And Michigan had originally been scheduled to be one of those community forums. People wanted you from one side of the state to the other, and you didn't come. Why did you cancel, Michigan? And could we get you to still come?
Right, so we have been working very closely with Michigan and all the states in determining the locations for these events. And if, in fact, Michigan now wants us to do an event in the state, we'll be glad to talk with you and talk with them about how we might do something.
I'm good. This is a formal invitation on behalf of a whole lot of people. I know Fred joins me on the other side. Don't you, Fred?
Unanimous, yes.
So you have an Upton, Wahlberg, Dingell invitation for a community forum in Michigan, and we take that you've accepted it. And I think our Czarina would support it too.
Right, so we would be very glad to follow up with all of you and your staffs about this, as well as with the state. And as I mentioned, if we have been working closely with Michigan, and if they in fact now have decided they want us to come, then we'll be glad to come.
I know a lot of people have. I was asked by many people to raise that. I want to go back again, and I know we all keep asking the same question, but I think what's really got everybody worried is we need to change the national standard for what is a safe level. And you're telling us that I think you're telling us that you're not saying you're going to determine whether we need it. I hope that you are saying that we do need to revise the standard. You're going to put out a national management plan by the end of the year. What's going to be in that plan? Are you going to give us what the new standard should be? And how long is that going to take? Well, how do we create that sense of urgency that cuts through bureaucracy and keeps Americans safe drinking their water?
Thank you very much for those questions. So a couple of things I want to respond with. First, to be clear, we have a guidance value now, not a regulatory standard, and one of the key items we're committed to at EPA by the end of the year in the management plan is to consider whether we should be developing an MCL for PFOA, PFAS, or other compounds. And so we're still engaged in that process. If we were to, in the context of a drinking water health advisory, think about lowering that level, we would subject that to scientific peer review before we took that kind of a step. So we're working through these issues now. We expect these to be addressed in the National Management Plan, and our goal is to have that done by the end of the calendar year.
So I'm going to push on that a little. So are you telling us you're still, I think that all of us on this dais have seen enough in scientific studies that we've got a problem. I think the children in Flint that got poisoned wish somebody had cared enough. So are we talking about another 2, 3, 4, 5-year bureaucracy, or are we looking at something that's really going to get at this quickly to keep the American people drinking safe water?
Right, thank you. And making sure Americans' drinking water is safe is a top priority for EPA, and we will continue to focus on this issue. You asked about the National Management Plan. This will be a comprehensive view, not only in the drinking water area, but across all of our statutory authorities about steps that we can take now to make sure that we're protecting Americans in their communities. And so that will be the focus of the National Management Plan, and the goal is, as I noted, to have that done by the end of the calendar year.
I have more questions for you, but I don't want Ms. Sullivan to feel lonely. So we've got 5 sites in Michigan that are sites that have been contaminated because of military presence. What is DOD doing to help us clean up in Michigan?
Well, thank you, ma'am, for asking. At all of those sites, we have gone out and identified where we have known and suspected releases. We have tested many drinking water sources. Every drinking water source that has tested above the EPA's advisory level.
5 of them.
We have worked with the communities to provide those citizens, because some of them are private wells, as you can appreciate, alternative drinking water sources. It's up to them which of these options are available. And then we're embarking on the entire CERCLA process to really fully analyze the situation. What are the sources? What are the pathways? And working with the state and EPA on what the remedy solution would be in strong partnership.
Obviously, there are a lot more questions, but I'm out of time.
Ladies, time's expired.
I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to ask you to be concise. As we've discussed, Michigan has 35 sites that have already been identified. I know that you are really leading the effort with the state of Michigan. It is one of the states that's doing more than anybody does, but we need to be doing a lot more. I want, in your testimony, you state that Michigan supports establishing a national standard for PFAS. Can you state the benefits of setting that standard, and is there a specific standard that the state of Michigan would like to see set for PFAS chemicals? And do you think that where the national standard is now is where it should be?
I think that I have seen the movement by EPA to change this. If we look in 2009, it was 400 and 200. We look in 2016, it came down to 70 parts per trillion combined for those 2 long-chain PFAS. And again, we see now ATSDR having a new focus on research that now brings children into this issue. And we are looking at the effect on children. Minimally, we need to take into consideration a standard that addresses children. So yes, we have asked EPA to set that standard, and more than that, we've asked them to work with ATSDR so that we can coordinate the health assessment along with EPA's enforceable cleanup standards for the states.
Thank you. I want to go to the most recent parchment in Fred's district, in Mr. Upton's district, and the Huron Valley watershed. One of my concerns is that there have been 3 announcements now in the last 6 weeks about not eating fish, and it's gradually gone downriver to Lake Erie. But my understanding is that the first fish was actually caught in May of 2017, put in a freezer, and was not tested until very recently. And so it was some 16, 18 months later that the do not eat fish announcement was put out. Why did that happen? Do you have the resources you need? And how do we make sure that we're responding in a more timely way?
Thank you so much for that question. Let me say that as we moved as rapidly as humanly possible to do and search out sites of contamination in Michigan, we started to look at doing surface water testing in our rivers. That to inform us if we have sites of contamination bleeding into the river. And when we look at fish testing, we added PFAS to our testing a few years ago. We've been testing fish since 1970. I actually called the lab director at the health department and asked him about the issue. that you just asked me about. And he said, it is not unusual that we take fish and freeze them. And he also said, we have done more than 700 samples this year. They are moving incredibly rapidly. They have been given money from the legislature to expand their ability to test, and they are searching diligently for staff to be able to handle more testing of water, fish, deer. And as we have looked at these industrial pretreatment processes and our water treatment plants and our disposal plants that affect our waters, we use those areas of investigation to go back, make sure we tested the fish, make sure we know where the contamination is coming from. And I'll address Sharon if you want.
Well, I mean, I think you will acknowledge that one took too long and you're trying to make it quicker. I only have a minute and I've got so many questions, but I think it's really important that people know it did take that long and you're trying to cut that time now.
Yes, ma'am.
Is Michigan testing for what we've been talking about today, the Gen X?
We are not testing for Gen X. There's very little known.
Why?
We are using two testing methodologies, 537 and an analyte test, and that brings us to 24 different chemicals that we are searching for. You heard that we have a suite of about 3,000 plus, and those two water tests are the acknowledged test, 537 requested and required by the EPA, and the additional test that we run with more analytes, we run because we get more PFAS.
I'm out of time. I yield back. No time.